Hi, my name is Tyler Collins. This is my presentation over all of our different frames for our TLI 112 class. So the biggest thing here to start off with is what are frames? So frames are the different categories of which we can kind of see people's mindsets and their actions. So these are including our red political frame, our yellow symbolic frame, our green human resource frame, our blue structural frame. Each of these frames have our distinct characteristics, so that way we can see how each frame understands their different items and look through different lenses. Some examples that we can see of frames is how someone with specific tendencies is within a specific frame. So someone with a structural frame or a blue frame is going to be more softly spoken. They're going to be very well organized and everything put in its exact spot and where it should be. And they have a big emphasis on doing the work as correctly as possible. But someone with the opposite frame on the other part of the spectrum, such as symbolic or yellow, they have more tendencies to connect with others. They're going to be a little bit scatterbrained, and they're going to try to do everything with everybody and try to do it all together. Some of these benefits to knowing how to do or to knowing frames is it provides an easier way to handle your communication because you have almost a predetermined response to each question. Um, when you're going through and seeing everything, um, if you have a politically minded person or a red frame, you know you can be direct and to the point when communicating, and that's the best way to get across to them. It's important not to generalize everything too much because if you guess wrong or if somebody leans, for example, more political and structural versus political and symbolic, you will left them feeling unheard and unappreciated and completely left out of the loop because you're not actually speaking to them. Reframing is the process of looking through another lens. So um, for me, I'm more symbolic and human resources based. So in order for me to be able to reframe and see problems from a different perspective, I need to think more logically and more fact based. So that way I can see it from another angle. Being flexible is super important, allows you to adapt to every different thing that's going on. So, as I just said, my own personal preferences are to be more in the symbolic and human resources frame, to do my connection with other people. I like being personal with others, and I also have a very strong balance between introversion and extroversion. I prefer to stay in that balance because I feel like the extroversion mindset on this half of the spectrum goes through and it's very fast paced, but it doesn't build a great connection. For the people over here on the introversion side, they have that great connection, but things don't get done fast enough. And they go through it, it leaves people feeling slow, and it's kind of hard to mesh with other frames. Some of my strengths is the ability to talk to people, connect with others, consider input from lots of different perspectives. And then for the small instant tasks, I'm good at being reliable and completing that kind of work on time. My weaknesses, however, are time management and getting jobs done far in advance. I can get bored pretty easily with very repetitive tasks, and I don't like a hard set routine. I worked a job over the summer farming, and every single day I showed up to work, something was different. And that's something I really value in my work mindset. My blind spots are definitely time approximation. So when I have something that's I know is a month out, it's hard for me to say, okay, I need to spend a little bit of time on this each day. If I spend exactly this much amount of time on it, then it will be done by the time I get there. So my preferences for communication and what my preferences influence on my communication is I prefer to get to know people personally before I go making a lot of decisions with them. So for me, that looks like going to lunch, going on walks, and then I also really prefer talking to people in person or on phone calls. So I like going into office hours or going through and calling up random people to talk to them rather than just shooting them an email or text. I feel like I get to know the person better and really get what they're trying to get across if I'm there with them in person. Um, so these preferences do affect my decision making. So my preferences begin to kind of limit my scope when I go through and I'm making decisions. For me, I don't typically think more than about 5 years in advance. So right now, I'm thinking about what my entry level job's going to be, how my career is starting to set up, but I'm not typically thinking about what my final house wants to look like or where I want to live when I'm 50, because that's outside of my current scope. Um, so for me, this is because so much can change in 5 years. Um, because of this faster moving mindset, I don't believe it's worth my time to sit there and try to plan everything out 10, 15, 20, 30 years in advance because end of the day, things can change, things end up happening. It's not worth my time to go through and think that critically about everything. Um, so frames go through and they help a leader organize everything better. So for the knowledge of frames, they allow the leader to understand an organization personally and how they operate. Um, this allows for the leader to implement change correctly, so that way it's more widely accepted. The example that I have listed is that if a leader knows that a organization tends to lead with a more structural or a blue frame, the leader knows to lay out all the information super far in advance and then allow the employees to look it over. This is very, very valuable to these people with the blue frame because they don't like sudden change, obviously. So if we go through it and we say, here's the stuff way far in advance, then they have time to actually look it over, adapt, maybe implement it themselves before they go and making a change, the day of, the day after, immediately. That's not a typical thing. So if you know how your organization works and you know the frames, you're able to complete all your work in a way that everybody respects it. Um, when you're reconciling with other frames, it's really important because you need to be able to stay adaptive. All the diversity allows for people to do their jobs in the best way they can and focus on their particular mindset. A good example of this would be a more symbolic employee helping out a more structural workplace, allows them to talk to people, get outside of their comfort zone, and keep more business flowing through because that's not something a person who leads with blue typically likes doing. Um, for my personal leadership, I believe that the structural frame is the most important because with no structure, you can't do anything. And it also leaves room for your product to fall short. And then the most difficult to put in would be green because there's no hard set way to do everything green. So thanks for your time.